You're listening to the FitMIND FitBODY podcast, where we explore the connection between running and positive mental health. We do this by talking to runners from all walks of life who generously share their experiences with us. So you don't miss an episode, I've created an email list for you to join. Check the show notes for more details. Without further ado, I'm your host, Michelle Frost. Let's get moving. Today on the podcast, we have gut health expert Lauren Callahan. Lauren's journey includes growing up in Louisiana, living in Bangladesh, and eventually finding her passion for running. In this episode, Lauren shares how she navigated major life changes and how running became a vital part of her mental and physical well-being. She talks about her experiences in Bangladesh, the challenges she faced and overcame, and how running helped her find resilience and community in recent years. Get ready for an uplifting and motivating story that will inspire you to embrace the joy of running. Now let's dive into our conversation with Lauren. Enjoy. Today on FitMIND FitBODY, I am excited to introduce you all to a lady from the other side of the pond, as they often say, from America, Lauren Callahan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for having me on.
I'm very excited to get to know you. You're a referral from someone else from America, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So I love this ability to basically talk to you, ring you up, for use an old-fashioned term, and have a chat and get to know you in this kind of environment. It's just lovely because we both know we're here to talk about running, and I can share you with the rest of the world as I get to know you. And I think it's just delightful. We're so lucky in this day and age to be able to do these.
Yeah, it's pretty beautiful.
So cool. All right, let's start with where you grew up. Obviously, you're in America, but maybe you didn't grow up there. I don't know. Let's go. Where did you grow up? Tell us about that.
I did. So I was born in the state of Texas, but I grew up in the state of Louisiana, so in the southern part of the United States. After I graduated college, though, I did move up to Canada, and I lived there for about 5 years. And I actually have spent a year and a half of my life in Bangladesh.
Wow.
So I lived there before returning back to America, to Louisiana. And this is where I'm at. This is where I'm going to be for a little while.
So when you grew up in Louisiana,
yeah,
that's a pretty warm place, isn't it? Because it's a southern state.
Yeah, absolutely. Hot, humid.
Do you have lots of siblings, or what was your childhood like?
I have not a lot. I do have an older sister. She's 5 years older than me. And then I have a stepbrother who's a couple years older than me. So I'm the youngest.
Love it. I asked someone that yesterday on the podcast and they had 7. I went, oh, that's probably why I went lots.
Well, I'm remarried now, and I birthed 2 of my children, but now my husband and I together have 7.
Oh my gosh. Here I go saying I've got 5, but then I go,
oh yeah.
No, that's a lot. I actually have had someone on the podcast who's had 12. He has 12.
Oh wow.
He and his wife.
Wow.
From
my goodness.
Goodness. It's a Mormon family, so I think they're quite common, or at least that's the perception, that they can have larger families.
I think stereotypically.
When you were growing up, were you very sporty? Were you really into running around? And
No, I wasn't. I would say that there were like pockets here and there that I really got into. So when I was in junior high, just in our gym class or PE class, there was a little while where we played badminton. Yeah. And I loved badminton. And this is where like competitive me like really came out, and I was pretty good at it in junior high. And I did actually really love volleyball. I never tried out for a team until I got to high school. I did try out, and somehow like when they posted the list of people that made the team, on like the cafeteria door, I missed my name. So I didn't think I made it. And so I went and tried out for the theater club instead and got in, and then found out afterward I actually made the volleyball team. So, but no, like I think, you know, when I was younger, like I saw a value in working out. So I would kind of like do that a little bit here and there, but it really was not my thing. And, you know, later on, just, you know, a few years past college, when I lived in Canada for a little while, I had a friend that, you know, she wanted to run with me a little bit and did end up doing a half marathon with her. But I would say like I finished that purely on youth, like youthful energy. And like we were like totally the last finishers. I'm not undermining it, but all that to say, no, athletics was not like a huge part of my growing up.
Can you remember what you thought about it? Like here in Australia, you have to, at school, you have to participate in certain running events at least once a year in the school carnival.
Oh, really?
And if you don't, you have to have a note from your parents to say why you can't.
Okay.
So, and as a result, the relationship between running and even a lot of people I've had on the podcast who are now, you know, love running, most of them, they didn't necessarily like it when they were a child because they had that experience of it. So did you have that? What's it like for you?
Yeah. Well, God, that's so interesting. Like in Louisiana, you know, our school system, if you were going to compare our school system to the other 49 states, it ranks like pretty low on the list. And, you know, so I would say that I went to a good school, but PE, like, do y'all call it PE or gym class?
We do. Yeah. Physical education, PE.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So for PE, like in high school in particular, I went to a very large school. And so you'd be in this PE class with like 1,000 people or whatever. And they would be like, go play volleyball. And so you would have this mass group of people, you know, you have at least 30 people on one side of the net. Play at least 30 people on the other side of the net. Cause they just didn't have the space and they were just like, go do something. And so, you know, I just stood around like as this little shy kid with, you know, who was not going to assert myself with 29 other people on a volleyball court. So, I mean, it was either that or like do nothing. Right. So we didn't do anything in PE for the most part. So there was definitely not that association. I would say that there were times when I did try to just go run around my block. But, you know, I grew up in New Orleans in Louisiana and, you know, that is a city that is associated with high crime. And so,
not so safe.
You know, so my parents weren't super thrilled about me, like just going around the neighborhood. So it just wasn't something that I did very much.
Wait, what about your parents? What was their relationship with exercise and activity?
They really didn't do it, although I say that, so I found out later in life, my mom mentioned at one point that she was part of an exercise class and I was never aware of it as a kid, which that's not like atypical of our relationship for me to like really have no idea what was going on with her. Although my dad, so I lived with my mom and my stepdad, and my dad lives all the way up in northeastern United States in Boston, Massachusetts. And now with him, it was a very different story. He was a marathon runner for a little while. And when I would go every summer to visit my dad, we would play tennis together, and I loved playing tennis with him. And now it's, you know, my dad and my stepmom, and they both are very, very, very active people. They're, you know, my dad is 82, I think. I don't know how old my stepmom is. She's a little bit younger. But they're very active people. They're very healthy. And I have learned so much from them as far as just living an active lifestyle.
Because that's something else that comes, you know, sometimes comes up in conversation in the podcast, either us as parents and the relationship we have with our children, how we demonstrate, you know, this being active as an adult, or how our parents, you know, affected us, and whether that's a toolbox that we've sort of got put away, even if we didn't use it as a child or even recognize it. So part of your DNA is that your dad is from a father who is a, you know, an active person as an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, you know, you bring that around to, you know, our kids. I mean, so kind of fast forwarding, like with our kids now, they certainly all have varied interests. But definitely some of them have become very interested in running at different points in their life. So for instance, my 17-year-old, but I'm sorry, no, God, he's 18 now. He's about to be 19.
Oh, stop that.
But
Oh, you missed a whole year.
yeah, I know. Geez, Lord. But when he was 16, my husband and I decided to take a trip to the Grand Canyon for the first time ever. And so my husband had this group of friends that wanted to do what is called the rim to rim to rim. So it's not an official race, but it's people running from, one rim of the Grand Canyon down to the bottom, up to the other rim, down, back up.
Wow.
And so in total, that's about 50 miles and a whole hell of a lot of elevation.
Wow.
So he goes to do this run. And so I go along. I'm not going to do that distance. I'm not ready for that in the Grand Canyon, but decide that I'll go down a little bit of the way and then I'll come back up when it's time. I ended up going all the way down to the Colorado River and coming back up. So about, half that distance, less than half. But anyway, so my stepson, his son, was his name is Caden. He was with us and he was going to stay with me, just kind of going down a little bit and then coming back up. He's a soccer player, but he's never run more than a 10K at this point, which is, a 10K is awesome, but I'm just saying that is the furthest that he's run. Okay. The day before we step into the Grand Canyon, he says, I want to do the whole thing with you, Dad. I want to do the rim to rim 50 miles. So my husband was like, okay.
The enthusiasm of youth.
I know. He's 16. You and I would need years of training for this sort of thing, right? And he's like, the day before, I want to go do it. Right. So my husband's like, okay. And of course, mentally, I'm asking about this later. And he's like, well, I'm just sort of working through in my mind. Okay, if it doesn't work out, how do we camp along the way? He's handling all the logistics and worst case scenarios in his mind and is like, sure, Caden, let's go. And sure enough, he does. And he does the whole 50 miles and he leads the pack too of this group of guys that went. He's in front. Just wow. So, I wouldn't say that he's super active running today, but yes, there are those little pockets where our kids have gotten into it.
And it's in his toolbox, as I love to say now. It's been enforced as well. It's not just that his parents, do this crazy thing called running, but and enjoy it. He's experienced it as well, to that extent. And in the future, if he ever needs it, it's there as a tool for him to take out anytime he likes, which is really cool. It's powerful.
For sure. And I love how you brought up the, not forcing it. Certainly when the kids were younger, we were like, okay, we're all going to do a 5K.
Yep. Yeah.
Or the 1 mile, I signed you all up and you're doing it, that sort of thing. But, obviously that's different as they get older. Yeah. And, my daughter, she's 15. She's a wonderful example of this. When she was younger, maybe 7 or 8 or so ish, she was interested in doing it because we were all doing it. But then she, kind of hits, 6th grade, 7th grade, just junior high. And she's like, Mom, I don't really want to do that. And so of course, okay. I don't ever force anything at all. Right. Yeah. But then at some point along the way, she has a friend that joins cross country and this friend is at another school. And so my daughter decides that if she runs cross country, she will be able to see this friend at the cross country meets. And so she decides to run. And so now my daughter runs. And it was kind of that scenario where we planted that seed with her, could absolutely not force that. That was not going to go anywhere. And then she at some point had the motivation that made sense, for her and at her age and everything else that worked for her.
That's
and
so
now,
good.
Yeah, she's a pretty good runner.
I love that. That's so good. What a great story. When you left college, what did you do? What's your work life plan, whatever?
Yeah,
what happened after school?
So my degree was in social work, and I ended up working initially at a facility for people who are developmentally disabled, and so I would kind of provided direct supervision and on a particular home that a group of these folks lived in. But then very soon into that, my first husband and I, we moved to Canada, and he was going to be a student up there. And so I thought that I had landed a job as a counselor up there. And it was like a dream job, right? It was like working on a ranch with, where they did equine assisted therapy with teenage girls. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever.
Oh, wow.
And then I got there and the place shut down. And they had neglected to tell me before we packed up everything.
Oh my
Because,
God.
while my husband was in school, I was going to be like the primary, breadwinner. Anyway, so I ended up working at a coffee shop because it was a job I could get quick. We met somebody, she helped. And so I worked there for 3 years and I loved it. Like I absolutely loved it. I became like a manager there and I was a baker there. And like, I loved working at this coffee shop.
And you
So
used all your people skills, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, then after that time, I became pregnant with my first child. And then 2 years later, my second. So I really did like the stay-at-home mom thing for several years.
Yeah. And then back to America after 3 years, as you said.
So I was in Canada for 3 years, and then we came back to Louisiana and I had my first child. And then we actually went back to Canada for 2 more years, because we just loved it so much. And that's when I had my second child. So 5 years total up there.
Are they, with your children being born, sound like they were both born in Canada?
Well, I got pregnant with my first in Canada, but I birthed her in Louisiana. So my daughter is strictly American.
Yeah.
And my son is what I don't know if you've heard, I don't know what we call it as Comerican. So he was born in Canada. So we haven't actually like officially done the paperwork to be a dual citizen, but he does have birth certificates for both Canada and America.
So you can. That was really what I was wondering. I didn't know whether you could have that kind of dual citizenship thing if you wanted
I
to.
think it's just a matter of going through some paperwork channels that we have not pursued yet, but he can.
That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So you said you went to Bangladesh. Where did that happen in your story? That sounded
so after we went back to Canada, 2 years later, both of my children had been born at this point. 2 years later, I went over to Bangladesh and I went with just my children. So I did separate from my husband at that time, and I did it royally. I went to the other side of the planet.
A long way away.
Yeah, exactly.
With 2 young children.
Yeah, I did, which, was, I don't know, it's got to be one of the bravest things that I ever did. I mean, I kind of look back and think, holy cow.
That's incredible.
But I don't know. I had lots of motivation for sure. And, there was always something very intriguing to me about living in a country that would be considered a developing nation. There was always a part of me that wanted to get away from American lifestyle, Western kind of civilization, and do something very different. I'd always had that in my head, and in whatever capacity that might be in, I had some ideas about what that might look like. It was not this one, but honestly, I ran into a couple in Canada that it was one of those just very like, you could say it was a chance coincidental meeting, I don't know, like here's the universe. Right. But, this couple was Canadian, but he worked for Chevron, and they were doing like a 3-year stint for Chevron in Bangladesh. And so I ran into them while they were like, visiting home in Canada. And, we just got to talking, and they were just very friendly, and we just kind of hit it off. And they were like, if you ever want to come stay in Bangladesh for a little bit, you've got a home. And I was like, okay. And so I did. I mean, this, like, again, looking back, I'm like, wow, that was pretty wild. But that's what I did. So I packed up my 2 kids and I went and stayed with them for a month, and then found a teaching job while I was there. It's complete culture shock. You start and it's the most wonderful thing ever. And then after a while, it becomes like, I don't know how to function in this place. It's so different. And it was all the things, right? Like it was, it changed me from the inside out for sure. That's one of those experiences that, breaks your worldview, makes you question everything, reforms
So
everything.
how long were you there for? You said a year and a half?
A year and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And how old were the kids then? They were still quite young.
Yeah. So they just turned 2 and 4 when I moved there. And so I did not leave with them. And this is, this is like a very traumatic story that I've written about in a book. So I don't know if Todd had told you about that, but I wrote a book called Couch to 50 Miles. And so I do tell the story in the book, but basically, halfway through that year and a half, my ex-husband came and took my 2 children. Yeah, so we had like the ugliest divorce on the planet.
Yeah.
Which I want to throw in very quickly and say that like we have mended. Like we are a powerful co-parenting couple now. We really are.
That's
like
great.
We cooperate and get along really well, but in the beginning it was quite ugly. So you took my children and brought them back to Canada, and I scrambled for the next several months to figure out like what I could do and how to get my children back. And we ended up back in Louisiana. And I'm thankful that I made a joke and say I'm crazy, but like, honestly, like that is an experience that will make you crazy. Like everything that was involved, and a mom losing her children, which is, I lost my children for over a year.
Oh, wow.
When they were, 3 and 5 at like an incredibly impressionable age. So I came back without them and scrambled for a year to get my life together and to get my kids back. And it did. And again, it's very beautiful now.
Because I get it. There's a lot of distance between then and now. I think from your story too, isn't there? We
they're 13 and 15 now. So it's 10 years.
When my oldest, who's now 32, and I separated from my first husband, we also had a similar experience, but much less dramatic, as in he came and took one of my kids, who was only 4 or 5 at the time, but forcibly sort of took him. But they were only gone for 24 hours, but it was a pretty horrible 24 hours because knowing that my ex-husband was not in a good mental space. And so, anyway. So yes, I can kind of understand if we didn't have countries involved and we didn't have, the amount of time that you're talking about or anything like that. But that trauma as a mum and all the stuff that's going on. Yes, I think it's only because I was younger then, in my 20s, maybe think that's the way you survive some of those things. But it teaches.
If there's anything that'll make you crazy, it's that.
I was already a runner by then, so I ran a lot.
Okay. I was not.
So that's how I dealt with it. What work did you do when you came back to America then? So you did teaching things in. Well, actually, I wanted to ask you though also. What another very small story before I ask you that question. We took my now husband, and I took our younger 3 children away and traveled for 18 months, and we had 7 or 8 months going through Asia, where we spent a month in each country. Kind of like backpacking, I suppose, and then eventually went into Europe and spent the rest of the time house sitting all the way through Europe. So those kind of experiences, really amazing. So I kind of relate to that in a way, that kind of culture shock that you get when you go to some of those countries, but how amazing it is and how incredible the people are and things like that. Just awesome. However, the question is, in the time in Bangladesh, what did that teach you about yourself? I mean, away from the drama of the your kids and things, but what did that teach you? Going from America, it's quite different, as you said. It's quite a different culture, I would think.
What did I learn about myself? I'm probably still answering that question. But I think what comes up immediately for me is that, when I went over there, I had an attitude of what I might be offering these people, what I had to give to this incredibly poor nation, right? And it wasn't just about financial poverty. At that point in my life, I would have identified with a particular religion. And so it was what I had, in that realm, maybe to offer these people. And I came back with the opposite of that attitude. And when people would bring that up in some way, like, wow, what you might have given them or whatever, like it was a foreign concept to me because I didn't feel like I gave them anything. It felt completely, and I know, I mean, that's, I don't mean to like
Yeah.
undermine myself. I'm not saying that that's 100%
Yeah.
true. I offered something, I did, but the overwhelming feeling is that I received from them and I learned from them, and I learned about family and community and
Yeah.
faith. And yeah, I mean, it just rocked my worldview, my perceptions of
Mm.
everything. Certainly, it broke down, my religious perspectives
Mm.
at that time. Um, yeah, I mean, just kind of the way I looked at everything. I remember. So one experience that I had there was somebody that I knew. His sister was having marital difficulties. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, there it's
Yeah.
mostly going to be arranged marriages, although love
Mhm.
marriages are definitely a thing now, but mostly arranged marriages. And so, his sister is having marital difficulty. I'm pretty sure that her husband had even hit her at one
Mhm.
point, and he wasn't working.
Mhm.
So she was, I think working at like a garments factory, that
Yeah.
was the only one bringing
Yep.
in income. And this man looked at me and he's like, I don't know what to do. What do you think I should do? And maybe if I had been asked that question, like when I first landed there, I might
Mhm.
have given an opinion. And
Yeah.
certainly any of us in the Western world are like, he hit her and he's not working. Like, let me tell
Yeah.
you what needs to happen here. But at that point, even that perception was broken down for me. Obviously, I would like never, condone that. But the thing that I knew at my core at that point was I can't give you advice on anything. Like, your community and your culture and your way of handling these things. Like, I cannot come in as an American person and give you an opinion about this. And so I didn't. And you know what?
Yeah.
They handled it great. Like they, called in, their dad. And I think, the husband's dad, they called
Mhm.
in an imam that was local.
Mhm.
They called in, I think, like one or two other like community leaders, and they sat down in the home and they just had like a good talking to to this, young guy who wasn't working and was being rough with her.
Wow.
And they had this good talking to, and they left. And everything changed. Like it really did. Like he
It's
started
amazing.
working and he wasn't treating her that way anymore. And like it really was great. Like it was totally handled. And that is not what we would have done here in
No.
America, right? So
When
yeah,
we
things like that.
when we traveled, what I noticed, and which relates to that, is that our culture, because Australia and America, we're very different cultures, but we have a very similar history, as in, Australia, as it is the Western elements of Australia, like the Western elements of America. When you
Yeah.
when you do all that travel, you realize that Bangladesh, India, we spent a lot of time in Indonesia and Vietnam and Cambodia and things. Their cultures are ancient, and that as a
Mm.
result, they've learnt a lot, whereas we're kind of new and still feeling our way, if that makes sense. Like we don't have those
Yeah.
hundreds of generations of relationship building and how you deal with those. It was a great example that you provided there. Because as you said, for us, even now, in Australia at the moment, there's a big thing about violence against women. And so my first reaction is, that's terrible, remove him from this, all of that.
Yeah,
But
exactly. Exactly.
but then you couch that in a really, it was a great example of what I'm saying, that we just don't have that depth of culture, that I don't know if that's the right word, but that depth of human being, that we've developed over eons because we're
Yeah,
so
and
new.
we tend to think that like we have arrived and
Yeah,
we're, civilized and know. And
exactly.
like we don't know all the time, right?
That's
Sometimes we
right.
know, but
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
times we
that's
don't
beautiful.
know.
I love it. Okay, so you go back to America. What work do you do then? Because we've got a social worker, you've done teaching. Who do you
Yeah,
become, Lauren?
so When I was in Bangladesh and was teaching English, I was teaching English because I was a native English speaker. And
Yes.
did not know how to teach.
Yep.
But I had always been curious about the idea of teaching.
Yeah.
And so when I came back to Louisiana, you have to consider the context. I've lost my kids. I have $500 to my name.
Wow.
And I have a half full suitcase, and that's it. That's all I have.
Which would be fine in Bangladesh for a year, but not fine in America for.
Right. Exactly. Not in America. It's not America.
There's a week.
So yeah. And so when I fly back to America, it's not until I get to the airport in Dallas, Texas, that I pick up a payphone. God, those still existed. Wow. I pick up a payphone and I call my parents and I say, hey, I'm in America and I'm almost in Louisiana. Will you come pick me up? Wow. And so they did. And so I went and stayed with my parents for a month. Yeah. And in that time, I kind of paint that context because you can see how I had nothing and I was working from the ground up and still needing to get my children. Everything was laser focused on what do I need to do to get my children. And so when I went to stay with them, I was actually 4 hours from where I live now, which is where my children are. And so, I just had to figure it out. Right. So I started immediately looking for jobs. And so I'm looking for social work jobs, but they were the ones that took forever. The application process and everything just took a long time. However, I think I mentioned earlier the state of our education system in Louisiana. So I don't want to say Louisiana, but the city that is, I'm in Alexandria right now, Alexandria, Louisiana, and Alexandria was in such desperate need for teachers that they had shifted their requirements so that you didn't have to teach, you didn't have to have a degree in teaching to be able to teach, at least for the first year. As long as you had a bachelor's degree, you could get in and teach. And then if you wanted to continue, you'd have to get a degree in teaching. Yeah. So we were 2 weeks before school started. So that the schools that don't have teachers are please, dear God, somebody apply. So I applied and ding, in 2 minutes, I've got the job. Right? Oh, wow. So I became a teacher. I became a teacher for exactly 1 year too. It ate me alive.
What did you teach?
I taught fifth grade English.
Okay. So it ate you alive.
Well, I loved my students, but I taught in a very, very impoverished school. So over here, they call it a Title I school. And it basically is just reflective of a school that most of the population comes from very low income areas. Yep. And they're usually full of kids that are not white. Yeah. And so it's just a different population. Yeah. I loved my students. I loved them. However, let me give an example. Okay. So let me tell you this story that maybe describes what this was like teaching my kids every day. Okay. So every day we would start off with what we call the bell ringer. And it just means 5 minutes that you do something that has to do with your subjects. And it's just meant to help the kids transition into your class. Okay. And so my bell ringer for that day is we are writing a journal entry. So I tell the kids, 10, 11, some 12-year-old kids, to write a journal entry for about 5 minutes on the best piece of advice you've ever gotten. Okay. So they're all writing about the best advice they've ever gotten. And so afterward, we're going to have share time, right? So, the kids start raising their hands one at a time to share what they wrote. And, this one girl, I remember, she reads from her paper and she's like, my grandma told me to never lie to nobody. And I was like, great, thank you. We won't worry about grammar right now. And so I call in a few kids. Well, this one kid, he was definitely one of my favorites too. He raises his hand, he starts reading from his paper, and he says, the best piece of advice that I ever got was, my daddy taught me to never kill nobody.
Oh, wow. That's solid advice.
Yeah, right. I was like, great. But, he goes on, right? And he says, because if you kill somebody, then you're going to have to go to jail. I was like, well, all right. Aside from the moral implications involved here, yes, you do have to go to jail. And then he goes on, he says, and if you go to jail, you have to eat their nasty food.
is that the end of that? Like, is that the main reason why you don't kill someone, because the food in jail is
Yeah.
not good?
Yeah, that was the end of it for him. And what's even better is that another kid in the class pipes up and says, "That's not true. Their food ain't nasty. My daddy told me so."
Oh no.
Oh my God. So this was like the population of kids that I was teaching every day, and I love them to death. But teaching them fifth grade English was like pretty much an uphill battle. Like we were working on reading first grade books at that point. But they were so wonderful. And I had a difficult time with discipline, that's for sure. But what it did show me was I didn't want to have like 20 of these kids at once or 25 or whatever. I wanted to have them one-on-one, and I wanted to help them with their mental health. So that is when I left teaching. I continued working at a coffee shop that I had been working part-time at. To help me get a second income while I was working through all that divorce stuff that was really ugly. So I worked at that coffee shop for a little while full time. And then I went back to school to get my degree in counseling so that I could become a therapist. So that's when I shifted.
So then is this the end of your career? I mean, no, there's never any end, but is that what you're doing now?
No, I did. I did leave therapy last year, actually. And so this is very much related to my running journey. So I might be like skipping around a little bit, but so in the middle of being a therapist, I'm in the middle of running at the same time, right? And so I'm in the stage of running. And certainly, like, if you want, we can go back to like how my running journey actually started. Okay.
I will. That's fine.
So
we don't have to go straight line.
Okay. So basically in the middle of that, I was trying to run a marathon, and I had actually been trying to run a marathon for 4 years and I could just never get it. Like I'd gotten up to a half marathon and I just like couldn't progress. Right. And it was always something. It was usually having to do with like injury or just difficult recovery. So 4 years, tried to run a marathon, couldn't do it. So I began to get curious about gut health. And I'm starting to listen to all this research about how, the gut is your second brain and it's connected to everything. And then, I'm listening. And at some point, I hear these stories about athletes who are saying, well, I improved my gut health. And now, I'm not dealing with injury the way I used to be. And so I'm hearing this and I'm like, okay, so you're telling me that I'm going to improve my gut health and I'm not going to have this nagging knee injury? Like, I don't know. But at that point, like I had tried everything and curiosity kind of won the day. And not only that, like I began to, the question began to form in my mind. What if, like, cause I was a pretty healthy person, right? Like I'm running for sure, but also like nutritionally, lifestyle. Oh my God, I was like a therapist, like, mindfulness, I live there. Right. So, like I'm doing all the healthy things for myself. I was like, what if I'm doing all these healthy things, but my gut is not healthy. And so my body is not able to receive the good things that I'm giving it. And that is the best question that I could have asked. Okay. Because I found out that my gut was actually, like, I wouldn't say it was like horrible, but if like we were getting a grade, like I got an F and like Lauren Callahan does not get an F and be okay with it. It's like maybe a high F,
but it wasn't good.
So yeah, exactly. So I took about like 3 to 6 months to laser focus, like improve my gut health.
Yeah.
And once I did, not only did I run my first marathon, finally, but then I ran. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But then I also went on to run my first 50 miler. And then I went on to do a full Ironman, and then I did another 50 miler, and then I did another Ironman, and then I did a 50K, and then I did 100K, and I did it all within 1 year.
What?
Yes.
That is a lot in 1 year. My gosh.
Yeah, I know. So I was kind of like, oh my God, like there's really something to this. But so to like bring it back around to like therapy and where that went. the other things like obviously, gut health and like athletic performance. Yes. Like solid connection there for me. But along the way, what I also noticed is that I had several of these moments where I was like, oh my God, like, I don't have anxiety the way that I used to. And then I'd have another day where I'd be like, oh my God, I'm sleeping again. Like I had gotten into this place where like I couldn't fall asleep at night and anxiety would keep me awake and I would be like bloated and have, whatever other gastrointestinal stuff going on. Like I had all this stuff and I'd have all these moments and I'd be like, oh my God, it's not a thing anymore. Like that is not happening. And I didn't intentionally try to change it. It just was like the side effects of me improving my gut health. So that's what like really got me on this train of getting like quite passionate about it. And I would find myself and let me say, like, I did a lot more research. Like I experienced this, like it was very experiential for me. And then I do my research and I'm like, oh, okay. So gut health is like very directly related to your mood and to your ability to fall asleep and not get sick and all the things, right? And to have energy. And so on the other hand, I'm a therapist now, and I've got all of these people, especially women, coming into my office and they're like, I've got anxiety. I can't sleep. I'm tired all the time. I'm depressed. And I'm like, okay, so definitely, let's take a look at this. Like, what trauma do we need to work through? Like, what is there to heal? Certainly, like, how can we, change your thoughts around? I mean, all of those things are very important, but I found myself being like, we really need to check your gut health because this might not have anything to do with like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, I would get these women, they would be like, I've never had this before. Like, I've always been able to sleep. I've never had anxiety. I've never had depression. Like, where does this come from? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, what? And I just want to be like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, let's check your gut. But that wasn't within my scope of practice and I couldn't really do that. So it was that sort of like train of thinking and that passion that eventually led to me leaving therapy. And now I do like very holistic health coaching with women, specifically women who are middle age, like that perimenopause time. And we do gut health and we do holistic healing. Like I use Reiki, we do a lot of inflammation reduction. So that's what I do now. I have goddess health. That's where I've landed.
That's amazing. Do you do anything online or is it all in person?
It is all virtual. Yeah. 100% online.
How do you do Reiki virtually?
Yeah. So I believe you asked that. So, because usually the first question is, what is Reiki?
Oh no, my mum's an art therapist.
Okay, great.
I've been in alternate medicine type things for most of my life in some way. She was an artist first, so
yeah. So I the idea with distance Reiki would be, you're channeling life force energy, right? And universal energy doesn't know time and space.
Yeah.
And so a level 1 Reiki practitioner is not going to do a distance healing, but those who are level 2 or master level, they have received that training necessary to do distance Reiki healings. And that's actually the only way that I have received Reiki is through distance. I've never had an in-person session. Really? I've only had distance. Yeah. And it was quite powerful. I was really amazed. Wow. And believe me, like there was a lot of, there were some definite trust issues going into that. Like, I can't see this person, like no technology was even involved for the actual session. So it's not like you even show up on Zoom and say hello. Like it wasn't any of that. It was just set the time and you just are comfortable and relaxed and in a place where, you can just be by yourself and relaxed and receive Reiki. And the time period that you're going to be there. And so you have to have a lot of trust that the other person is on the other side actually doing it. And so that was, I want to say it was a hurdle. It wasn't exactly a hurdle. It was just a mental sort of like, okay, I don't know about this at first. Yeah. But I, decided that I wanted to try it. And then in the end, what I landed on was, okay, like, I trust the universe enough that if I'm going to show up and set the intention to be open to this and to receive Reiki, to receive this life force energy, that the universe is good enough that is not going to be dependent on whether this other person shows up. Like, I think that the universe is going to honor my intention.
Well, and actually, what do you have to lose? Like, what do you have to lose? Really?
Exactly.
I fully
Exactly.
believe that almost we can heal ourselves. That a lot of stuff that goes
Yes.
is all, yeah, pretty much everything. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know about that, but touch wood. Um, yeah, I think we're
Yeah.
much more
Yeah.
powerful as than we understand. That's
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And when I was a therapist, the therapy model that I really landed on and spent my time in, and still just as a way of like being, I practice it like not as a therapy model, just a way of being in the world, was IFS, internal family systems.
oh,
And the reason is because it very much puts trust
mhm.
in the client's ability to heal themselves. And the therapist is really just kind of like a guide in the process of helping like facilitate like an internal connection of a
Yeah,
person's like self
yeah.
to all of their parts, and just tapping into their own healing ability.
I think with my mindful movement, mindful running sort of stuff that love to talk about, to me, that feels like it's opening you to be more in touch with yourself and therefore
Yeah.
start those conversations with yourself and to be able
Yeah.
to tap into anything that you do need as life throws things at us because you're aware you're not we are so busy in our modern life being bombarded with information and entertainment and all the things that we realize. I mean, I realize now, and I'm aware of it, that there's many days that go by where I feel like I have not spent any time with myself without, just having input from others and other all the time, constantly. So it's
Yeah.
that ability to be able to do that I think opens some of these doors that you're talking about, which we all have available, but we just don't open the door.
Yeah, for sure. I had a beautiful moment with one of my clients where we were just actually meeting in a group, and just for like 2 minutes, just 2 minutes, I just invited them to close their eyes and just
Mhm.
breathe
Mhm.
deeply. I don't even know if I said deeply. I think it was just breathe.
Yeah.
And, just invited them. I mean, I do this often. I'm
Yeah.
just thinking of one particular
Yeah.
time. I just invited them to notice whatever was there to notice, if, a physical sensation or an emotion or a thought, and to notice it without judgment, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Again, we took about 2 minutes to do that. And, everyone came out of that just like so relaxed. And I remember one person in particular, she was just like, oh my God, as soon as I did that, I had no idea how tense my shoulders were. And she was like, I think that they live that way all the time.
Yeah.
But she, just hadn't been taking the time to notice it, listen to it, be aware of it. And she and I asked everybody like what their goal for the week was, and she was like, I'm gonna breathe. That's my goal. I'm gonna breathe, y'all. That was beautiful.
That is so good. I love it. All right. It sounds like you found yourself in an amazing space where you are now. That's really feeding
Yeah.
yourself, but also helping other people, which I think is fantastic. Now, where did running start in all of this journey? Tell me, Lauren.
Yeah.
Now we know that you've done some pretty amazing running things now, but how did it start?
Yeah, well, I almost feel like it's even easier to tell because now you've seen like the backdrop of everything that's
Yeah,
going on.
exactly.
So at that moment when I had been working at the coffee shop
Mhm.
originally as a second job to help me like get through all the
Mhm.
divorce
Mhm.
financials, but things were like mellowing out now with,
Mm.
we were on a path of healing, me and my ex-husband, and then
Yeah.
certainly me and my kids. So I was at the coffee shop working full time. And that's when I decided, because life had settled, okay, I'm going to go back to school, for therapy, be a counselor. And so I did, but what that meant now, and I got like a part-time job doing like bachelor level counseling kind of work.
Yeah.
So what that meant now is that I was sitting all the time.
Mm.
I had been a teacher standing on my feet, and then I'd been in a coffee shop standing on my feet. And
Yeah.
now I was in school and at a job where
Yeah.
I was sitting all the time. And I was like, I have to do something. Right.
Mm.
So that's when I start walking slash a little bit of jogging a mile around my neighborhood. And I
Mm.
love to tell people that because that was truly only about 7 years ago. So when people hear now about, what I just told you, oh, I did,
I
50
know.
miler and Ironman, and people are like, oh my God, I can barely run a mile. And so I want to make sure people know that that was me just 7 years ago. Like I couldn't even run a mile.
That's amazing. You have really stepped up.
Yeah, well, so that's where it started. Okay. And so I would say like the next progression for me, and this is like really great. Okay. This is one of those storybook stories. Okay. Some of your listeners are going to gag, and then others are going to be like, that's so beautiful. So, the man who is now my husband, okay, he had walked into that coffee shop when I worked there, and we got to know each other over the counter. But we were totally old. Yeah. We were totally old school. There was no like exchanging of numbers. We didn't have social media, none of that. So we were just getting to know each other over the counter. Well, I left that job, right, to go back to school. Well, in the time that I gave my notice, saying I was going to leave the job, he, for whatever reason, didn't come in during that time. So I didn't actually get a chance to tell him, hey, I'm leaving. Do you want to give me your number? Like that never happened. Right. So we lost each other for a year. No. A year later. Yeah. So 1 year later, I'm a yoga instructor at this point, and he like breezes into my yoga studio, where not mine, but the yoga studio where I was at. So he comes in to do yoga, and it turns out one of my fellow instructors was his like half sister.
Are you kidding?
And so she was encouraging him to come do yoga. And I'm thinking, Lord, her name's Charlotte. And I'm like, Charlotte, you've been holding out on me. Like, I've been looking for this guy for a year. So in he comes. And so we, of course, like reconnect and start talking. And he tells me that he is training for his first ever half marathon. He had not been a runner previously, but he's training for his first half marathon. And it's because his daughter, now my stepdaughter, is a St. Jude's patient. Are you familiar? Yeah, I assume.
St. Jude's sounds familiar. What is that? Why do I know that?
So
we have a lot of American culture in Australia.
Yeah, well, and they're like, so it's a hospital in Tennessee, but they have quite a global impact. So they are like the children's cancer hospital, and they take children from all over the world, and
so probably
and
they do stories on,
and
I'm pretty sure I've heard.
So so his daughter, my stepdaughter, is a St. Jude's patient, and she is cancer free now. But they have a marathon weekend every year in December. And it's one of their biggest fundraisers, right? Yeah. So he's training for this half marathon as a way to like give back, for all that St. Jude's did for his daughter. And so at that moment, I decided I'm a runner.
Of course you are. You've been many things, yoga.
Yeah, like he's really cute. I'm a runner.
I ran around my block.
Yeah. So I just started training with him, and that was pretty much the start of our both of our running journeys, for sure, and then certainly our journey together.
So sweet. I love that. So that was like romance and running all together.
Yeah, it totally was. Like it's definitely one of those stories.
There's just been an article this year. There was an article, and we've got ABC, Australian Broadcast Commission. So that's our national, and because I know you have ABC as well. That's why. Yeah. Anyway, so they had a sort of story that went all over Australia, and in print and in then video, and I also heard it on the radio. So it kind of just went everywhere. But it was about romance in running groups.
Oh yeah.
Just this year. It was like, I think because of COVID, and then that was one of the only activities that you could do for a little while. And so a lot of people, there was the upswing in people getting into running. And then as soon as you could start meeting in groups, run groups started, if they already existed, they sort of got a lot bigger, and lots of new running groups that have popped up. And then people started meeting each other. And then, there's got this whole thing that, another way to meet people. It sort of just became a big story.
Well, for sure. And I'm definitely one of those people that at that point in my life, I'd be like, I don't know how you meet people. Like, I don't know, maybe the traditional ways that people find love in midlife. I wasn't really doing them. So.
Well, I think that was even the comparison between the apps. They were saying there was people not using the app so much to meet people, but going these run groups and stuff. There, I thought it was really fascinating. And a healthy way to.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Much better way to meet somebody, I would say.
So you two do a half marathon. But, a minute ago you related to us that you did all of those longer distances, those endurance events in 1 year. How did you go from doing a half marathon to doing many in 1 year?
Yeah. So, yeah, I would say, after my husband and I had done, I probably like a few half marathons. There was a day that so my husband has a friend, his name is Ben, and he lives in North Carolina, which is about like 14 hours away from us. But one other piece of context here is that at the time we lived within 1 mile of a 26-mile forest trail. And it's called the Wild Azalea Trail. And it's the longest trail in Louisiana. And it was like basically in our backyard. So this is where we would run, right? So it's not even like we weren't running around the city or anything like that. We were running in the forest, which if anything will get you to love running, it's running in a forest.
Beautiful.
And so, so every year though, they have a race on the Wild Azalea Trail. And, there's usually like 10K up through like a 50 miler. So and at one point they had 100K. Some ultra distances, some not ultra distances. But anyway, my husband, Brandon, his friend came in from North Carolina. We didn't know this till afterward. He drives in, he runs the 50-mile race and he wins it. And then he gets in his car and he drives back home. And we're just like, whoa, is he immortal? We didn't know that people like really did this sort of thing. Like we weren't really familiar with any sort of like ultra community.
Yeah.
We just didn't know like that human beings like do this. Right? And so I think, especially like having a friend do it, and a friend who, like Brandon, this was like and like me, like this was a later in life kind of thing. Yeah. Like it wasn't like they grew up being amazing at sports. I don't think he did. Maybe he did. I could be wrong about that, but like a later in life kind of thing, Yeah. So yeah, a friend, like a human being that like does this sort of thing. So I think it was that really got our wheels spinning. Like, what else are we capable of? Like, what else could we do? And so that was the thing that just like piqued the curiosity for us.
Yeah.
And kind of, put the bug in us to want to try and see what else we could do. And I would say along with that, so I had a little bit of a detour, like, so I'm seeking what is that longer distance that I can do. So, a marathon, right? So I'm continually trying the marathon and then I'm having 4 years worth of frustration, right? So within that time period, dealing with like knee injury and pain and stuff like that, there were many times that I just like threw my running shoes, right? And I'd say, well, I'm not going to run, but I will go bike. I will stand up paddleboard. I'll do yoga. Just need to make sure I do something every day, that kind of thing. And maybe occasionally I'll run so that I'm not like hurting. So I start getting into like more things, right? And I stopped racing. I think for 2 years, I didn't sign up for any race and just sort of had a feeling that like, if and when it was time to sign up for a race, like I would intuitively know it. And so what happened was one day my husband comes home and he, neither one of us had ever done a triathlon at that point. Okay. And so he comes and he's like, hey, there was this Ironman in Texas or whatever. I don't know. It just happened. And so what he didn't know was it was actually a half Ironman, but us not knowing it, he, thinks it was an Ironman. Yeah. And so we're both like, okay, what else is involved in that anyway? so he looks at me, he's like, well, it looks like, it's, a mile of swimming and, like 62 miles of biking and a half marathon. And I was like, because that was also one of those things that in my mind, I would have always associated an Ironman with like people who are immortal. Right? Yeah. Normal human beings don't do this.
It's right? called Iron Man for a reason.
Right. So I hear this and I was like, well, I'm having trouble running, but I have done a half marathon. I know I can do a half marathon, obviously. I have biked 50 miles once. No. So I had biked, how much did I bike? 50 or 60, something like I had biked that distance one time in the past. I'd done it in Boston. So I was like, I know that I can bike that distance. I was very tired at the end of the day, but I know that I can do that. Right. I was like, I don't really know how to swim, but I think I could learn. And so like nothing right away, but it was sort of one of those things that I kind of like tucked away in my head, like just kind of curious, like maybe it's not just for immortal people. And so again, later I find out that wasn't the full Ironman, that's a half Ironman, 70.3. But either way, so I tucked that away. So what I find out soon after that is that St. Jude, so the hospital that, started our running journey together, basically, that they all, every single year they have their marathon weekend. But when I was looking it up for the first time ever, they were going to have a half Ironman. So St. Jude's first half Ironman weekend ever. And right then I knew. I was like, okay, it's St. Jude's. It's their first half Ironman. It's going to be my first half Ironman. So I signed up and I was like, this is so cool. And then after I signed up, I was like, oh my God, they have time cutoffs. Like I didn't know. Which completely freaked me out. I was like, I better learn how to swim quick.
It'll help you when you fall off the paddleboard, the stand-up paddleboard.
Right. Yes, exactly. So, long story short, like I learned how to swim. I barely finished my swim in time. Like I had 15 seconds to spare. But I did finish that. And so because I'm neurotic, like I can't do a half of something, like I have to go on to do a full. So I attempted a full Ironman. And here's what happened. Out of like 140-ish miles, I got to mile like 137 and a half. Okay. I did the 2.4 mile swim. I did the 112 mile bike ride. And then I get to the marathon and I get to like mile 23 and a half. And at that point it's 12:30 a.m. They have to pull me from the race. It's just too late.
Oh, no.
So I didn't get to finish. Interestingly, I cried my eyes out, but I totally was not disappointed in myself at all. I really wasn't. Like I was so proud that I had like
could have finished it. Like they just stopped you. So,
I like yes. And honestly, there was a part of me that was really glad they pulled me because I was dying. Like I didn't know how I was going to make it through that last 2 miles. I was struggling. So like I was really proud of myself for, doing it and for showing up and for not quitting, I mean, sometimes like I have quit races before. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I have quit races when I've known I don't need to go on. This is going to hurt something and I don't need to do that. But I was really proud that I didn't quit that race. It was really tough. But what that ended up doing in my mind was, okay, I didn't run a marathon, but I got pretty darn close and I did it after all those miles on a bike. I was like, okay. So at that point, like I moved beyond my goal of a marathon and then I moved it up to a 50 miler. So by the time I did a 50 miler, I had never actually officially done a marathon race. And I still don't think that I have.
That's hilarious. What made you go on from those experiences to, the year you described a little bit before, where you have now taken on lots beyond that, the marathon?
I think a few different things. One is certainly when I was younger, I was not athletic, as we talked about. I mean, I had those moments of true competitiveness, but truly, like in my upbringing, the thing that was prized the most was my brain, my ability to perform academically. And I can definitely understand this. Like my parents all grew up very poor and they, moved up to like middle class. And so like, I definitely understand like where they were coming from. If I could do well in school, I wouldn't end up like having a life that they had when they were children. Right. So I definitely get that. But it was overly prized, like me performing academically. And so what that meant was I truly have spent most of my life sitting at a desk.
Yeah.
And so to enter into this new part of my life, where I am like continually discovering what I'm capable of that I never ever would have dreamed I was capable of, like ever. Like this would never be something that I would have thought that I could do. That is so freaking addictive to discover that you're capable and that you can. And dear God, like what else can I do? That feeling is so addictive. And so for me, it has just been a continual, growth, maybe I guess you call it like a growth mindset, but just a continual drive to do more, and just to see what else I can do. And I am also, even apart from that, I'm just very addicted to the feeling of going all day long. Like, I was asked at one point, what is your favorite race distance? And I answered 100 miles, but my disclaimer is that I have not completed 100 miles yet. Okay. But I've tried, and it was my favorite race. And it was because I loved, and shorter races that still just involve like this all day long effort. I absolutely love it. And nothing will break you down in the same way. Nothing will dig deep in the same way, right? And your inner self and spirit will not emerge in the same way that it does when you spend all day and night moving, right? It's such a beautiful experience. And I feel, usually I've had some races that were, all day and through the night that weren't really fun for me. So there's that, but often a really long effort like that, I feel so connected to myself and to nature and to like this higher energy, higher spirit, higher self, in a way that I don't experience in other places. And I'm addicted to it. I love it.
I talk to a lot of people who do ultra distances on the podcast, and the common theme is, when you ask, why do you run these long distances? Like, what is in it for you? The story about how these kind of events break us down, as you just described, but build us back up again by the time we finish. It's that, and it's not, maybe it is reborn, but you're not the same person that started the race. You're a different version. But it's because of this process that you go through when we do these things that are really hard, and we find out what our limits are on that day. There was something I read recently about limits, and that was that there aren't any, and that we just keep putting it on ourselves. But literally, there aren't any, actually. So it's kind of an interesting concept to think about when you're out there thinking, I don't know if I can go another step, but you do.
Yeah. Well, that first 50 miler that I did, that one was really like of particular importance to me. And because, I did my first marathon, and then I did a 50 miler, but I did actually attempt the 50 miler on the Wild Azalea Trail. So the race I was talking about earlier. And I didn't do it. Like, that knee thing did get me, and I like hobbled into like half marathon distance. The thing was, I wanted it so bad, and I can't even like fully describe that. I mean, I wrote a book about it where I speak many chapters to why it was so important to me, and I still can't even like put my finger on it, but I just wanted it. And I probably trained more consistently for that race than I've ever trained for anything else before or after. Right. Like, I don't know that I ever like really missed a day. Right. And so to get like, to train so consistently and to want it that much, and to show up and to not do it. I mean, like, I was pretty devastated when I didn't finish. And so 2 months later, I was like, I'm going to do it. And I even talked to the race director, because we know him, he's kind of a friend of ours. And I was like, hey, if I just go out onto the trail, like on my own, and just do 50 miles and send you a picture of my watch, will I still get the mug? And he told me, yeah, Lauren, if you do it, I'll give you the mug. So I was like, okay. So I was really kind of like, when do I do it? Because I needed my knee to recover. But it was also Louisiana, and it's a time where it was about to get like absurdly hot, and I would not be able to like finish it. And so it's kind of like, I need to do this like now or never. I had also signed up for an Ironman, and like the original plan was like train for the 50 miler, then train for the Ironman. So I'm like moving into Ironman training time. I'm like, I got to do this race. Right. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, I was not as like well trained for the second time that I went out. There was nobody out there. I told my husband a couple days before, I was like, I'm going to try this. And he was like, okay. And so I set out in the morning just by myself on this trail. And when I get to mile like 26, things aren't feeling great. Like, I'm at the turnaround point. And I called up my husband, and honestly, my plan was to tell him, this is not the day. I'm going to have to come back and do this. But as soon as I get him on the phone, he was like, "Hey, how's it going?" He's like, "As soon as I'm done with work," and he does like hard work. Okay. Like he
Yeah.
works all like hard all day long. Like physically, just
Yeah.
depending on the day, but like he owns his own business. He works
Yeah.
physically very hard. And he's like, "When I'm done with work, I'm gonna come meet you on the trail and I'll run with you the rest of the way." And I was kind of like, okay, damn it. Like, I guess I gotta finish this thing. And so he comes like a trail angel at around like mile 35 and brings me like hot tea and hot quesadillas and like new socks. And it was the most wonderful thing. He's amazing. And he gets on the trail after a full day of work and he starts running with me. And so like things absolutely start breaking down for me by about like mile 42 or something. And I roll into mile 48, once again, only 2 miles away from the finish line, kind of like Ironman that happens before or after. I'm messing up the timeline there, but yeah, it was before. But yeah, I got 2 miles left to go and I completely collapsed. Like I'm running and then I just like fall on, like not fall, but I just like collapse onto the trail and just like curl up into a ball. And I'm fevery, like I'm shaking, like I'm shivering like madly at that point. And my husband doesn't say anything. He just like finds some sticks and he starts a fire for me. And he makes sure that I'm ready to eat something, that I have some food. And he kind of like just patiently like nurses me back to health. And 2 hours later, I stood up and I walked my happy little butt off the trail, like the rest of the 2 miles. And I finished the 2 miles. And so I guess to bring it back around to what we were talking about, like the limits, right? What sort of limits? That was such a powerful race for me because I remember walking off the trail and I remember that it wasn't just something that I was thinking, that I truly felt this to the core of my being. And what I thought and felt to myself was, I can do anything.
That's amazing.
And I had never had that sort of I can kind of attitude before. And it wasn't even just an attitude now. Like it was truly like a change of, beliefs, like worldview. Like it was to the core of my being. I believed it now in a way that like I could never convince myself of it before. And now I knew it.
What an amazing gift you gave yourself. That's awesome.
It was.
I love that. I had a similar feeling finishing my 100K earlier this year, just that I can do hard things. And just that ability, that realization that you can do hard things is really empowering for anything that goals that you set for yourself. Think, and then you start signing up for lots of longer things and see what happens.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It's just, yes, that ability to be able to do hard things, I think, is a bit knocked out of ourselves because of this comfort zone that we like to live in our cultures.
Yeah. And I feel like it's important to remember too, like, your hard thing is the hard thing, right? Like, one person's hard, like I always, harp on this a little bit, but like when I was walking and jogging a mile a day, like that was my hard thing, right? And that was important for me. And there's no undermining it at all. Mile 100, like whatever your hard thing is.
That's probably when it comes to that comparison stuff, isn't it? Like that's such a bad space to get into, that comparing yourself to others, as opposed to comparing yourself to you yesterday. If you compare yourself to others all the time, you never, it's your limit you're looking for, or expanding. Probably your limits you're trying to expand, probably not looking for. If we don't have any limits, then whereas if you compare yourself to others, like someone starting to where you are now, that it's just going to be soul destroying it.
I love that. Comparing yourself to yesterday and expanding. I love that. That's beautiful.
It is. That's awesome. You keep talking about your husband and running, and he's like, I just wanted to, do you do all of your running together? Like a lot of you running together? How does that look? What's your day?
No, we don't. So certainly when we started running, we did a lot more running together. But then, actually when we first started and I first started training with him, he actually broke his hip like really soon after that. Yeah, I know. And so he actually could not do the half marathon that year that he was signed up for. So the intention was to sign up the next year, which is what we did. But while he was recovering, I decided like, okay, I got to get up to speed here, right? Because I'm like nowhere near him. So I would say once his hip recovered and we were able to run together, we did. And we ran together a lot, and we did almost all of our training together. Now, no, we don't. For one thing, I can't really keep up with him. He's very fast. So he's a lot faster than I am. But sometimes though, sometimes we do run together, and he intentionally slows his pace, so that we can just be together. He actually, recently had something like really awful with his back that kind of bothered him a couple of days. And so I was running and he met me on the trail, and I slowed down and walked with him. So sometimes, yes, we do that. But I really can't remember the last time we actually ran a race together. It's been a while. We did consider running a race together this past spring. And it would have been the longest distance that I had ever done. It was like 74 miles, but in the end, I decided not to. He did the race. It just was a really tough one, and the race director actually sent an absurd amount of emails talking about how tough the race would be, and if you don't think you can handle it, you should go ahead and drop, which I really didn't like. Wow. But I ended up dropping, but he did the race. So maybe we'll do a race in the future, but as of yet, it's been a while since we've done one.
So what does your running look like now? Like, what goals do you have, and what are you training for?
Yeah. So I still have a goal of running 100 miles. And I was hoping to do it this July, but I signed up for a race that you like have to have a qualifier for, and I didn't get my qualifier. So I'm bumped down to 100K, which will still be really great. But it just won't be the 100 miles. And also we're like in the middle of like just a blisteringly hot, humid summer. And I've said in the past before, I'm not going to sign up for a race in the summer because training is just miserable. but I made an exception for this particular race because like it's just really cool. Like there's, I don't know, horses, and it's in the mountains, and it's just like it's just this beautiful area. It was like an opportunity. But now that it's like summer and right before the race, I'm like I can barely get anywhere, I feel like, in training. So hopefully that goes well. We'll see. But yeah, so overall, I still do have a goal of running 100 miles. I have another Ironman that I'm signed up for. I want to do that again. Oh, wow. Yeah. So those are my goals for right now.
So you've got lots going on then, really, haven't you?
Yeah. How do you? I keep saying I'm gonna stay away for a little bit, and then I don't.
How do you fit it all in? Like that's always something. You're a busy person. If you didn't do the running, you still got lots on. You've got family and your work and all of that. How do you fit your training in? Because it's not like you're training for a 5K or a 10K or even a half. When you do these ultra distances, you need to put the training in before you get to that start line, don't you? That takes time.
Yeah. So I have played around with how I structure my training quite a bit. I've changed it many, many times based on my family and my job and what I need at the time. I will say the thing that's probably been most consistent with that is that because like we are a blended family, that means that we don't have our kids all the time, right? Yeah. And then certainly on the weekends, we have them every other weekend. Yeah. So generally what I've done is saved my, my long runs or rides or whatever for those weekends when we don't have the kids.
Okay.
And then I've, structured my work schedule so that, usually I'm doing my training, while the kids are at school. Sometimes I do it when they're home. And again, that has ebbed and flowed and fluctuated like based on my kids' age. And sometimes it's figuring out how to do something while they're there. And sometimes it's not. And sometimes it means going to the gym so that they can, play basketball while I'm on the treadmill. And sometimes it has been, running a mile away from the house and running back and checking to make sure that everybody's okay. Again, and it's just dependent on their ages. Now, our youngest two are 13. So, the kids are older and, into a lot of their own stuff. Yeah. And I'm not like as much of like a stay-at-home mom. So I would say doing training is a lot more flexible now. But I still kind of hold to that either every other weekend is the long stuff. And a lot of times I've been able to work it out where I don't work on Fridays. And so I'm able to do the long stuff on Fridays as well. And then the weekday training, if I don't feel comfortable with getting away to do like a run or a ride or something like that, then I just stay at home and like I have like workout equipment, like, barbell, like a barbell set, stuff like that at home. And so I'll just work out at home and just count it as good. So like my training is not, it's not something you'd look up and be like, I want her training plan because it's super like consistent and effective. It's not that. It's more like the hodgepodge, like mom version.
It's what works for you right now.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. Do you ever run with other people? Like I know we've talked about with your husband. Do you?
Yeah, not a ton. I really enjoy the solo runs. I do. I love just being out in the forest and just being on a trail and like, it's fun every now and then to have a friend to run with. But mostly I'm very much like an introvert by nature. And so I just love being out on the trail and, just connecting with the forest. Yeah. Like, I love that, right? I love the quietness of it. I never listen to music or anything.
That was going to be a question. Do you ever listen to music or anything?
No, I pull it out sometimes as a last resort if I'm really struggling. So like on that 50-mile run, when I was really struggling at the end for probably a couple miles, I pulled some out. But that's the only scenario. Like if I really need to get my mind off of some pain for a minute. But other than that, no.
A bit of a distraction.
Yeah.
Sorry, I needed to cough. When do you think you first called yourself a runner? Like you've given this fantastic story. It's been quite fascinating. But when do you think you first thought of yourself as a runner? Or do you even think of yourself as a runner?
Yeah, I love that you asked that because there's a very specific moment actually.
Cool.
So it was when I was actually training for the half Ironman.
Yeah.
I went to a sports massage therapist and he was just working on me, doing the fascia release thing. Yep. And he at some point referred to me as an athlete. And I remember how much it surprised me. I was like, me, like me, an athlete. And it just surprised me so much, right? But I kept thinking about it and I was like, well, what else do you call someone who spends like, 10 to 20 hours training, 10 to 20 hours a week training for something and revolving like their nutrition around like fueling and everything. Like, what else do you call those people? I was like, well, I guess I am an athlete. And like, there was something really beautiful about just, like I'm all about like the non-identification thing. I do think that it is an important principle in our life, but there was also something really important about identifying as an athlete. And it felt like I just was allowing that to, be created in my life. Like I was giving that space instead of pushing it away. And, it was like kind of one of those like unleashing like who you really are kind of moments, which was really cool. So that's when I started calling myself an athlete in general.
And so then often when I ask that question, we start walking through, well, what happens if you can't be athletic in your case, or you can't run because you've got an injury or something? How do you deal with that? And obviously you have, because of your background, you've probably thought a lot about identity and how it affects us if we can't do so, if it's taken away from us for a little while, how will we deal with it? And I assume you already have very good answers for that.
It is really tough. So I do, like that can feel quite devastating to me. Yeah. Those times when I can't run, I have a really hard time with it. And it also reintroduces me to other things that I love because I will make sure that I do something to be active. I will do something for my health. So if I can't run, I will make sure that I go stand up paddleboard. If I can't run, I'll make sure that I go bike. I'll make sure that I'm still working out. And actually, not being able to run has been really crucial to me expanding. Oh, use that word earlier. Expanding into these other things. It was because I was having trouble running that I started biking. It was because I was having trouble running that, did stand up paddleboarding, right? It's because I was having trouble running that I did strength training. Like I never picked up a barbell until I was after 40. Like that was the scariest thing in the world to me. And then once I started, I was like, whoa, this is cool. And I feel different and I am stronger and I feel healthier than I've ever felt. Like, whoa, what a new world, right? So it was because of all the times that I couldn't run that I got introduced to this stuff. So at the moments in my life now, so that's a reason to be grateful for sure for the struggles with running. And now when I experience times that I don't run, it's frustrating for sure, because I like having those goals to work toward. And running is just easy. Let's feel like really I can like walk out the door and run, right? The others take a little more planning. But I will always come back to, I'm going to spend an hour, somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a half every day, doing something, and it should be a mix of like cardio and strength training. I'll do that every day and I will be healthy. And that's what I come back to. And ultimately what's most important.
I think the fact that the term you used earlier, being athlete, it's a bit more of an all-rounder than, which is great because, although you said you're disappointed when you can't run, because there is something that running gives us that we don't get with a lot of those other activities. I think, and it's not just the ease of doing it, although that's part of it, but I think there's something in our human body, we're made to run, most of us, and I think that feels quite natural once we get into the rhythm.
Yes.
But if you're describing yourself as an athlete, I think that gives you the capacity to, even when you can't run, as you described, there's all those other things that you can do, and perhaps that softens that, the fact that you can't run for a while. You can do all these other things. So I love that. That's a really nice way. I might adopt it, actually.
Yeah, go for it.
I might be an athlete rather than just a runner, because I don't do all the other things very much. I do strength work now, though, which I also am an advocate for, because as we get older as well, I think it's so important for us our longevity in running.
Absolutely.
Talking about longevity, how long do you want to run for? What's your...
right now the goal is 100 miles. I really want to be able to run 100 miles.
What about in your life?
That is the goal.
How long?
How far ahead in life?
Yeah.
I would love to run forever. Like I always want it to be a thing.
Excellent. I wrote a book once called Run Forever.
Awesome.
Not that there's a wrong answer to that question, but it's like, most people say forever. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. I've got a book called
Forever. Yay. Oh, that's great.
A long time ago. It always makes me laugh when people say that for some reason. If you're
like, I coined that first, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's like, hey, I know that. I'm really familiar with that. If you hadn't started running, how do you think your life would be now? What would your life be missing? What has running given your life that you wouldn't have?
Wow. God, what a great question. Like, I can't even imagine my life without it. Like, if that had never started, because it just was so connected to, it's been so connected to everything. Like, it was connected to, my relationship with my husband. It's, been a huge connection, like with my kids at not all of them, but like at different points. Right.
Yeah.
And it's been a huge connection for my health. And it has also been a huge driver for me to get interested in gut health and to get interested in Reiki and get interested in, paddleboarding and biking, like when I couldn't run, right? Like it's all in strength training, which didn't pick up the barbell till after 40. And I'm so glad that I did. That's a really important part of my life. And if it hadn't been for running, like, I don't know that I would have done any of that. Right. So my career switch, right? Like maybe I'd still be a therapist, right? Because it was running that spawned all of the interest in like holistic health kind of measures. So, wow. I'd probably be doing a lot more yoga. That's more of a concrete answer, because I did become a yoga instructor before I started running. And having never done strength training whatsoever. Like I was so super flexible. so, I was a pretty good yoga instructor. Get into almost any pose. Yeah, I'd probably be doing a lot more of that.
So fascinating. I did want to, before we wrap up, because I know I've already kept you for ages and we could keep going for another ages, but I did want to delve just a tiny bit into the gut health before we wrap up, and
For sure.
how as an athlete, what kind of things did you do in order to improve that? Give us a little, I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but what are some of the concrete things that you did in order to get to where you are now?
Yeah, for sure. If it's okay, I'll like give a little analogy that
I
I
would
love
love
to
that.
use that kind of like, yeah, wraps it up. And I will say that like if the analogy kind of tracks with your listeners, I actually have like a checklist on my website that you can go through, so you can kind of hit the high points of what I hit. So I like to use the idea of a forest. So as an analogy for the gut microbiome. Okay, so if you were to walk into an area and see like one tree, 10 miles off, you would not think to yourself, I am in a forest, right? Because a forest typically has like a lot of trees, right? Yeah. And if it only had like pine trees, for example, you would be wondering what's going on, right? Because a healthy forest is going to have more than one kind of tree. Like it's going to have, and more than one kind of like wildlife, right? Like it's going to have hardwood trees as well. And it's going to have ferns and flowers and mushrooms and deer and rabbits and all the things, right? And diversity. Also, if you walked into a forest and there was like nothing but, deer, for example, excuse me. Sorry about that. Again, you would wonder, like, this is not a healthy forest. Like, where are the other animals? So we want, we want this forest to be balanced for it to be healthy. And then finally, I don't know what it's like over there, but in Louisiana, where I'm at, in our forest, we have an invasive species, and it's the wild boar. So hogs. Okay. And
you may not like to hear this, but deer are the invasive species.
Oh, no kidding. Oh, you know what? I think I've heard that before.
That's funny. Anyway, keep going.
That's so interesting. They're like they're like a little bit protected here because
it's different. We got so kangaroos and things instead. So
yeah. Okay.
It's different.
Right. Well, so the hog is our invasive species. And if you go into a forest, like I don't know what it's like with the deer over there, but like here, if a hog is there, it like tears up the forest floor and it drives out all the other wildlife. So if you see like evidence of hogs around, like you're probably not seeing other animals. And the plant life has been pulled up a little bit. So there are things that like ravage the health of the forest. Okay. So taking the forest analogy to the gut microbiome, think of like the wildlife as bacteria. So our gut loves bacteria and it loves a lot of it. And it loves diversity in that bacteria. And it loves the gut loves to be balanced. And there are things that can come in and ravage your gut microbiome. Okay. So kind of breaking that down a little bit, this is bringing it back around to like what I did and some general principles for what people can do for their gut health. And it does totally depend. Okay. It depends like everybody. And that's kind of a frustrating answer, but everybody's different. So what works for one person is not necessarily the thing that like another person needs, maybe even like to start with. Maybe it'll help them down the road, but not start with it. So as far as like the diversity and the population of bacteria in the gut, some things that can help support that are bringing more fiber into your diet. So most people like don't get enough fiber, and that is something that supports the population and diversity of bacteria in your gut. Having a fermented food every day, and different fermented foods usually can support the diversity and population of bacteria in your gut. So those are two examples of that. As far as the balance in your gut, again, the gut loves to be balanced. I don't know what it is like where you are, but let me tell you, like in America, and it's, so I'm 43, right? Like my generation of women and those who are older than me. Like we grew up in this generation where in America, like women were taught that carbs are bad and that fat is bad and like food is bad. And alongside that, like, you know, most women I would say are a lot more aware these days that, you know, as we age and, you know, I mean, say age, but I mean, really like 30s, 40s, you know, like that we need more protein. And most women are aware that we're not getting enough protein. And so you combine that with this knowledge, you know, quote unquote knowledge of like carbs are bad, like fats are bad, all that, you know, you've got an incredible amount of women like really overdoing it on the protein, but they're cutting out, you know, other foods that they need. They're cutting out the carbs, they're cutting out healthy fats, and your gut does not like that. Like it wants balance, it needs all of the above. And what makes it worse is that like a lot of women are getting these because of like our need for like a convenience kind of lifestyle. Like a lot of women are getting these proteins from very low quality sources, such as protein powders, protein bars, that kind of thing, that are usually not balanced and don't have like the nutrient dense foods that you get like with fruits and vegetables and high quality fats, high quality proteins. But, you know, they also often have other ingredients that will, you know, going to the last point, ravage your gut health. And those, you know, can certainly be the preservatives, but also like artificial sweeteners. And in general, those things that can ravage your gut health, kind of like the hogs do in the forest here, are like like you can't eat crap, right? Like your foods that are like high in the highly processed foods or foods that are high in highly refined sugars. And then certainly, you know, we're a very antiseptic society, overuse of like antibiotics and, you know, constant use of antibacterial soap, being on your phone and not getting in the dirt. Like this is what I bring up because, you know, there's actually bacteria in your gut that you can only get from dirt. And so, so when you're never like outside putting your hands on some grass at some point, you know, and you're in front of a computer or phone or whatever all day, like you're not getting the things that promote a healthy gut. So those are, you know, kind of some general principles, certainly like overconsumption of alcohol and caffeine. And again, all of that is very dependent on the person, right? But yeah, so, you know, again, like if somebody's interested, like I have that little checklist on my website. So if anybody wanted to check that out, it can be a great starting point for finding, okay, what can I get better at? What can I improve? Where can I start?
Does it tend to be a bit of a trying something to see if it works for you as an individual? Because as you said, you know, everybody's a bit different. Is that
so I would say there's a little bit of yes there, but I'd say on the whole, no.
Principles.
Well, what I'd say to that is that, you know, when I started improving my gut health, I got my gut health tested. So you can, you know, get a blood test. Like there's several different ways, companies out there that do like gut health testing. The one that I use uses a very simple blood test. And so this is actually the very first thing that I do with all of my clients so that there's no guesswork or like, you know, it's like 10% guesswork and like 90%, oh, here's what's going on and here's what we need to do about it. So for the most part, that path is very clear. So I'll give you a little example too about that test and like how it differs, you know, between people. So when I got my gut health tested, there are 11 different gut metabolites that get to look at. And there are many different gut metabolites, but 11 of them are tested with this particular company because they're the ones that like show up more than anything, you know, as related to, you know, all health outcomes pretty much. And so one of the metabolites that gets tested is called 3-methylxanthine. And this is one that is very reflective of inflammation in your gut that is caused by caffeine. Okay. So I got this and my levels were like off the charts. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I just drink black tea. Like I don't even drink coffee. Like I am not the Westerner that like goes to Starbucks all the time. But like I just drink tea and I'm like, well, okay, I drink it really strong and I have like 2 or 3 cups a day, but like it's tea, right? So I was pretty upset about that and went on a path of reducing caffeine. But then later on, when my husband, he got tested because, of course, I'm like, oh my God, gut health, right? So he gets tested, and I'm thinking, oh my God, his 3-methylxanthine levels are just gonna like be off the charts because that man could put away some coffee. So I was like, this is gonna be bad. But do you know, we got his results, and his 3-methylxanthine was like just a little bit high, like not that much. And I'm telling you, like we could have like bought stock in coffee, right? Like if people come over to our house and like he makes the coffee, like everybody knows they have to add like half a cup of hot water to it. Like he makes it strong and he had a lot of it, right? Like the amount of caffeine he ingested, and he had a better 3-methylxanthine level than I did.
How frustrating.
And so, yes, exactly. I was like, but okay, I'm glad for you, right?
Really, I am.
But yeah. And so like that for me, like definitely illustrates how everybody's gut is in a different place. I can definitely say like reduce caffeine and that will help with inflammation in your gut. And that is true. But does that matter for you as much as it matters for you? Not necessarily. And also the other thing I'd point out with that is that he is a dude and I'm a chick. And what I have seen over and over again is that women, like I mostly work with women, but I have tested men's gut health as well. Women, every single time, like I've never tested a woman who's starting gut health was better than a man's ever. Okay. And I'm telling you, like, these are guys who are like, oh, sure, I'm healthy, but like they like drink ranch dressing, right? And then you got women who like are truly trying to do all the things to be healthy, and they still are not at the level, that a man is like starting out. That's so not based on research. That is, yeah. Like, but I mean, I think that just goes back to like the hormonal changes that we are experiencing, especially like midlife women who, are often in perimenopause and don't even realize it, or menopause and beyond. I think it goes back to all that.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Well, I'm going to put a link to your website and they can go and have a look at the checklist and do a bit more research, because I think it's something that's really valuable to all of us, whether you're a runner or not a runner.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got a friend here who's a doctor and has been on the podcast. She runs a little bit. She's a bit more of an athlete than just a runner. She's really fascinated by gut health as well, and done a lot of stuff like you in that area. So
yeah, cool.
She so it wasn't a surprise to me when you say that gut health is connected to all the things. She was also says that, and I've seen a lot of studies about that in the last few years too. So I think
absolutely,
definitely onto something, and we can all look at it and improve. It's a great way that we can have some agency for our own health, which is running's one thing, but the gut health, and there are other things too. But I think education, is really valuable. So once we know these things, we can actually take control of it ourselves rather than just floating along and just doing whatever.
For sure, it's a way of like getting to the source of places that need healing and places that are imbalanced within us, right?
Yeah, I love it. That's beautiful. Before I wrap up, there's two more questions. One is there anything about running that you'd like to share before we wrap up? But I'm also going to ask you for some tips, so don't throw running tips in there. Unless you
okay.
Is there anything about running in general that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share?
Oh God.
Or have we been thorough?
Yeah, I'm trying to think maybe what we haven't touched on. I'm trying to make sure it's not a tip, what I'm about to say.
People always give tips in there, but whatever.
I think what I want to say is that I just love running on trails. And so I don't know what that availability is like, I mean, we have cities and towns, right? Like it's different everywhere. But, I think if I had just only been running on roads, I probably would have been done with it by now. but it's something about just being in the forest that takes running to a much deeper level, right? Like,
Yeah.
yes, health and goals
Yeah.
and all the things, but there's just like another level of certainly like mindfulness, yes, and like connection and spirituality and just healing that I think exists on the trails. And I know I make it sound beautiful, and it's like every run is not that way. Definitely not. But like on the whole, it's just an environment that is so conducive to just that more like holistic well-being.
I think I often say that everyone can have moments of that, if that makes sense. So that everyone is not going to be a sailing wonderful thing from the start to the finish, but and a mindful, place to be. But if you
Yeah.
can have a couple of moments of that in every run, then that feeds your soul and improves your health and and your mental health in particular. And that is my aim, is that every run that I have, that it has an element of that, even if it's just a moment. That's what I'm
Yeah.
happy for that. Doesn't have to be
Yeah.
great the whole time. Mm.
Yeah, I love that. And a lot of times like it's not great most of the
Mm.
time, but I would say at least by the end of it, I tend to have clarity
Yeah.
with whatever it is. Like if like my mind or whatever was a complete jumble, and maybe most of the run, like I did spend like thinking and ruminating and like,
Yeah.
being angry or whatever it
Yeah.
is. Like the forest is like, and running is like a place to release that, I feel like. And usually by the end of it, I have like a slightly higher degree of clarity on like life than I did before I started, even if I wouldn't like describe the run as like awesome and amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? I love it. Okay. Running tips for beginner runners. If someone comes up to you and says, Lauren, I want to start running, where would you suggest they head? What would they do first?
Yeah. So one thing I would say is, well, I feel like a couple things that we already mentioned. One is, to not undermine what feels like a small distance.
Mhm.
Um, oh, it's just 1 mile. No, it's a mile. Celebrate that, right? 1 mile leads to a mile and a half, right? A mile and a half leads to
Exactly.
two, or to something else, right? It opens the door to something completely different, right? But celebrate like whatever is your challenge in the moment, celebrate that. Like don't undermine it. Like you said, like don't compare yourself to anybody else. That will completely like steal the the joy and the fun out of it. So yeah, celebrate your challenges right now, and your accomplishments. Don't undermine the small things.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is, if it seems really, really hard, go slower. So,
Good
and I think
idea.
it's one of the reasons, yeah, I think it's one of the reasons why I love ultra running. You just have so much permission,
Yeah.
to run at a slower pace. And I think, to bring that into any distance, like if you're running 2 miles and it feels really, really hard, yeah, slow down, like walk and
Yeah.
run once you get your heart rate back to a place you're comfortable with, or,
Yeah.
jog once you get your heart
Yeah.
rate back to a good place. And and know at the same time that you are progressing, and you're probably progressing more by going slower, right? And there's a lot of science behind that. Like if you're always trying to go like fast and hard and beat yourself up, just to improve, you're probably like physiologically not improving. Do that like once or twice a week for a short amount of time in that run, like push yourself to an interval or something, but on the whole, like go slower. And you will be physiologically even improving, so don't be afraid to go slow.
Yeah, I think there's go slow to go fast. No, go slow to go far.
Mm.
Someone wrote. I read that somewhere recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. They're great tips. Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you
Yeah.
for being on
Thank
the
you.
podcast. Thank you for sharing your amazing story. What an inspiration. And you're only halfway through your life, so you've got heaps more inspiration to come. I will put some links in the show notes to your gut health stuff and maybe to your book as well, and anything else you would like me to. Don't jump off straight away. But again, massive thanks and gratitude for you coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much. This has been such a great conversation. I feel like we could talk forever.
Absolutely. That's
Thank you.
Might have to do a part 2. Anyway, thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you for listening to the FitMIND FitBODY podcast. I'd love to talk to you about your running journey. Send me a message on Facebook or on the website and let's do it. I also wanted to let you know that I've created an email list so you won't miss any podcast episodes. You'll find details in the show notes and on the FitMIND FitBODY website, along with a bunch of resources on mindful running. They'll help you to get and stay mentally and physically fit. And I'll see you there. Plus, I'll be back here in your podcast player a few times a week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review. It'll help more people to find the podcast and get inspired to start running and ultimately to improve their life. See you soon.